we are again. I'm just going to start the show. It's happening now.
Oh.
Here we are again. What is this show called, Malcolm Craig? What is it called? History and Games?
History and Games, Games and History. Or Games and History, History and Games. You can take it whichever way you want. It's a movable feast, really, to be quite honest.
It's everything. So we sporadically get together to talk about history and games, games in history. I am Jon Hodgson. I run a little games publisher called Handiwork Games, and we make mostly role-playing games. We make a few card games as well. And a lot of our games are kind of informed by historical themes. Who are you, Malcolm?
I'm Malcolm Craig. I'm Senior Lecturer in American History at Liverpool John Moores University in Liverpool in the UK, and also sometime has been games designer of little repute.
Not has been anymore.
Has been, no, getting back into the scene. Yeah.
Is again.
Is once again, yes, republishing the 3 games I ever actually did.
Nice, and new ones.
And new ones as well, which we're going to talk about. Actually, that's the thing I would like to talk about today amongst ourselves. Do we want to do any more preamble? Or
no.
Right, so one thing that we've been talking about quite a lot amongst ourselves before we start recording, he says, pointing straight at the audience, is personal history and the role of memory in informing our understanding of our own personal histories and of games design. And the reason we've been talking about this quite a lot is because Handiwork Games has just published, Reaches for Prop, this, The Burn, which looks amazing.
It's all right,
if you don't know what The Burn is, this was originally promised as a stretch goal for the original Mask Witches of Forgotten Doggerland campaign. I'm going to put that down now because we've got a copy up here.
How did that get there?
And it's taken a wee while because of the transition from using AI art in the original version of Mask Witches to that decision to move back to human created. AI art is created, but anyway, let's not get into that debate at the moment. And The Burn was promised as part of that, and we finally got round to seeing the light of day. And The Burn is, I think, a really interesting exploration of personal history and memory of the past within a gaming context, because essentially it's about my childhood, which is a really interesting thing to put down in a game. For those of you that don't know, we're currently in Pullman. Well, Brighton's, Pullman, Reading, Muirhead, the Braes. So outside of Falkirk in Scotland, and just down the road, actually in Pullman itself, is where I grew up until the age of 14. Then I moved up the road to even closer to here in Brighton's. And Pullman there's a lot of big housing estates there. That's where we grew up. I mean, I don't mean, full of middle class people, let's be honest. We always went out and played as kids down the Burn, which is a stream, a beck, a brook, whatever you want to call it. In amongst all the estates that formed Pullman is the Pullman Burn, which runs all the way down, ends up going under roads and railways and all these kind of things, and ends up going into these concrete canyons as it heads into Grangemouth, where the big oil refinery is. And on summer days, we always used to go down and play there because it was a magical adventure. You'd go through culverts, there'd be old ruins and bridges and trees and little waterfalls and places to explore. And we'd go out for an entire day with a little, some sandwiches and a can of fizzy pop, and off we go. And this game is about that exploration of personal history and childhood memory. Me as a kid in the late 70s into the 80s. And those explorations and all the stuff that we found. And that's what I think I'd really like to talk about today, because The Burn's just come out. It's about personal history and memory, and also the histories of places and specific locations inform a game. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say, Johnny, because you've actually brought this to life with your amazing model making and photography that actually is photographed. These miniatures that John made, photographed, at The Burn itself.
These little guys that we made. Yeah. I should sort of go on about them as being, just in their sort of making of the Burn thing, that these are completely scratch-built figures. They're all built from nothing, bits of brass tube they're built out of. And I made all their little clothes and everything.
Yeah,
what fun I had.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's really, to be briefly sort of serious about what you're actually talking about, I thought it was a really, really interesting project that you grew up here and then I moved here completely coincidentally.
Yeah.
And the fact, I've been talking a long time about writing something about my own childhood, without going into too much detail about that, but I lived in like this absolutely wild place in the middle of nowhere in the Cotswolds that had been a Bruderhof community, religious community, the a German sort of religious sect that had fled Hitler's Germany, but couldn't find a home really in England because people weren't that keen on Germans in the 30s. So they then moved on to South America, and then the site they had built became a sort of therapeutic children's home. Kind of long story short, it was like a special school, and then it became a therapeutic children's home where my parents worked, and I lived there as a staff kid. But it was like this big sort of country estate in the middle of nowhere. And what a crazy place to grow up. And I've long wanted to sort of do something with that as a game for the Silver Road rules, same as Mask Witches uses, same as the Burn uses. I think it's really well suited to that. So when you had sort of talked about the Burn, that was a really good option for me to not write it. Now you write it. But the fact that I live where this happened, and then we could go back with these models, because we'd sort of established models and sets as the way I wanted to illustrate, well, the Silver Road actually, and then Mask Witches in particular, to be able to go to the actual places and photograph them is just, there's something in that, isn't there, that's just wild. It's brilliant, really good.
I mean, for me, it was to see the finished product. It was incredibly cool, because it is a kind of like a fantasy of my personal history, of my childhood memories. Even like the map, which I love, is kind of based on the Pullman Burn. Places are renamed, so like there's the Deed House, which is, I remember the ruins of Pullman House on top of the hill. Now, it was demolished when I was really young. I must have been only about 6 or 7, but I still remember it. And I remember it being kind of like waste ground and the old walled gardens that we explored all the time. But I remember it still, before it was demolished, it was these black spaces where the windows used to be, and you were told, don't go in there, you'll fall down into the cellars and never get out. And everything. And it was the haunted, it was, I mean, for us, it was a haunted house. And it was a fascinating, and all these kind of being able to, the big estate there, that's where I grew up, that's kind of part of Pullman. And there's the kind of, all, you know, that's the Bairns House, which means the child's house in Scots, is St Margaret's Primary School, where I went to school as a kid. And it's fascinating seeing this, my kind of imagined childhood history.
It was a
put
really
into pictorial form.
Interesting journey for me, like making that map and reading all the different places in it. That, because I've lived here for like 20 years, there's loads of places I don't know at all. Like, you know, that I'd never heard of, because either they're gone completely, or they've changed purpose. A lot of the big houses have now changed purpose or been demolished. That's kind of interesting in itself. I know you had shown me, because there's the bridge to Pullman House that's now in the park.
No, so Pullman used to be home, because Pullman actually quite a lot of very wealthy industrialists and merchants lived in the area. There was the only extant one, I'll probably get this wrong, is Park Hill House, which is in the Grey Buchanan's Park, which the Burn runs through. That's still there, and it's flats now. Pullman House is destroyed, is now a housing estate. Lathallen House is a ruin. We've been round that. It's in very precarious state.
We've been round the outside of that at a very safe distance.
We're not being inside it. Cut.
What he's talking about.
Avondale House was standing, but then it had a fire.
Right.
Millfield House, which is just across from the Burn, or was demolished a long time, maybe the 50s, I think, Millfield House. So there used to be a whole load of these big houses in the area.
Proliferation of them, isn't it? Down the sort of Firth of Forth. And they're a little bit different to sort of, they're not quite like the English, like Downton Abbey kind of house. They're not quite that big, are they? But they are really from really well-to-do people.
Oh yeah, very, very really wealthy individuals.
There's a lot of, well, there was a lot of industry hereabouts, and a real variety of industry. It's, again, fascinating.
I mean, get another part of this local history, which I would like to actually maybe maybe it'll be a supplement to the Burn. I mean, across the canal and the railway, about half a mile, quarters of a mile, just that way, he says, pointing in a direction. I'm basically pointing east. There used to be the biggest explosive detonator works in Europe. It was the Nobel Works at West Quarter. And it was vast. It stretched all the way down the canal and the railway. There's nothing there now. There's maybe you can see a few stubs of walls. Bits of it have been built on by housing estates and all these kind of things. But it was the biggest explosive detonator works in the world. In Europe, sorry. And that's a fascinating. That's the part of the which is gone, and that doesn't exist anymore. And I find we kind of like explored that area when we were kids, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah,
You had no idea that
it
it was
brilliant.
It was the old explosive works. We used to kind of explore. I mean, just across the road from where you live, John. We always called that the Bricky, and none of us knew why. And it's because up that way was a brickworks.
Yeah,
we should have twigged that, but it was just called the Bricky. That's what it was called. But that was gone. But all this industry was gone by the time. And how does that affect your kind of like mental imagination of the past and all of these kind of things?
Isn't it really interesting with stuff like you talk about the Bricky? I was thinking about the level as well, like Nickleton Road. Is certain people will call Nickleton Road the level.
But I always call it the level because that's what it's called.
And some people know that and some people don't, and that's kind of interesting. I don't know why it's called that, and
because they only put a sign up saying Nickleton Road.
I think
it was after we moved up here, and that was 1989.
Yeah, so it's a recent.
It's a relatively.
I don't know why the level was the level. What was it like?
I have no idea why it was called the level.
But you get these sort of almost different communities within a community that know different things, and I think that's really fascinating. I was just thinking about the brickworks as well, because there were loads of brickworks around here.
Loads of them. Yeah.
And clay mines is a huge thing, and fire bricks were coming out of Falkirk area. All over the world, there's Finland connection with fire bricks, all going.
White Cross, which is a couple of miles down the way. White Cross, the manual works, was the biggest refractory in Europe at one point. It was giant. It was still going when I was a kid. Hundreds of people were employed there, and then just down across the motorway and everything down into the woods was the old fire clay mines. Yeah. And everything down there.
Fire clay bricks were really important. I mean, I should learn more about it really than I know. I know a tiny amount. But it's really interesting, say, if you're in this estate now, which is very middle class, basically, people moan because the gardens are all clay. The soil's rubbish. It's clay. But they don't sort of know this town is here, or this part of this town is here because of that clay. And like California, there's a little village up the road called California. Now, was that coal mine at California or was that clay? But they found that they could mine. I think it was coal at California.
I can't remember.
No, I should have done research before. But a mine was open, and they called it California because it happened around the same time as the California Gold Rush. So they named it California. And Arnold Schwarzenegger has been given the freedom of California. I hope he enjoys the freedom of those two streets that are California. Indeed. But this sort of, it is fascinating, and it is, that sort of product of memory and culture and how things are preserved. And not preserved. I love the fact that we don't know why the level is called the level.
And it's also the
someone can tell us
that kind of the fallibility of memory, which is one of the reasons I love the Burn is because it's a fantasy of my childhood history. Very obviously little people and all these kind of fantasy of like childhood memory, but it's this kind of thing about the fallibility of historical memory. Do I remember things that actually happened, or did I just make stuff up? And thinking, did I actually ever do this? Did my friends and I ever do this thing? That I frequently tell. So a story I always tell about kind of why did I end up becoming interested in Cold War history, particularly nuclear history. And my story always begins with the film Threads was shown in the BBC in 1984, this terrifying depiction of nuclear war, and my parents let me watch it age 10. And it gave me nightmares, and it terrified me, and I've always been kind of like, what made me so scared? And that's driven my interest in nuclear history. And I look back on that going, did that actually happen? Is that a memory I have made up to retrospectively justify what I'm doing now? I'm convinced it did, but then again, I have this serious self-doubt, but I actually don't know.
Are you really maligning your parents?
Am I just manufacturing this memory in order to have some justification or have a nice little story to tell people? And I find, I mean, that's why I think kind of embedding personal histories into a kind of a more fantastical framework is a more productive way to go with this, because it allows you to play with memory and everything. I mean, in the Burn, one of the the opening bits is, are these wee folk real, or is it just the imagination of kids in a hot classroom, bored by what the teacher's saying, imagining themselves as these little people defending the Burn from litter and dogs and all of these kind of big boys and all of these kind of things that are in it, or are they real?
I really like how that translates into the game. I say in the forward because I thought about this for a little while. I think there's an element within the Book of the Burn that is, there's a fragmentary element to it, and I think that carries on really well from Mask Witches. I'm deciding how crazy I want to sound. I try and avoid terms like crazy. How obsessed I want to sound. I was really fascinated by Paul Beakley's review of Mask Witches, or like mini review of Mask Witches, that says it doesn't have much setting, and it does. There's loads of setting in it. It does. Yeah. But I know what he's talking about. It's not lore. It's not a lore dump. Yeah. It's things like I sort of point at things and go, "This doesn't exist. This does exist." Yeah. And all the artwork and everything else is saying. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I thought it was a really interesting comment. That's why I'm sort of obsessed about it. I'm not upset at Paul, I think it's really interesting to look at what I think about a thing I made and what someone else looking at it, the way the lens they look at it through, right? And I think the Burn has a really interesting feature of that fragmentary nature of that as a setting that doesn't say, you are little magical people and this is what they can do and this is where they go. Yeah. That isn't all there. It's fragmentary like memory, because we have all been children. I think we can all get something out of it, and I'm really interested in those gaps.
So I mean, all of this stuff is, sometimes it's very hard to kind of boil this down, but I entirely agree that the history within games, if you have this overarching history, if you have a lot of lore, and some people love that, some people play games for that, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not criticizing people. I'm not saying your way of enjoying games is bad. It's just, this is just it is. No, I'm joking too. As someone who is only too aware of the burden of real history, that when you create these fantastical histories that are, you're expected to have some knowledge of, and that can be this real burden. Am I contradicting this? Can our characters do this? Whereas this kind of approach, where it's, you can kind of really fit the fragments together in the way you want to, and there's no kind of canonical kind of sense of history behind everything. Maybe I'm at the stage in my kind of life with games where I'm not sure I can be bothered reading all this stuff anymore. Maybe because I read history all the time. I'm a fundamentally lazy man. Someone goes, "Here's a short, brilliant. This is more my kind of thing." Because I'm reading kind of books that are that thick, on a day-to-day basis.
I think works really well within. He says about his own game, but within the Silver Road, because every player basically has more or less the same authority as the games master or games mediator. Yeah. Is it in Silver Road? You can say whatever you want happened, and that it's so unfixed. The setting is discovered in play quite deliberately. So really, I think the Burn works really well as a setting book for the Silver Road, because it isn't nailed down, and and you could play it without anyone reading that book. Actually, I'd rather everyone bought one.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something we've about. That we've been asked before, particularly on the kind of the Handiwork Discord server, about A-State and the kind of the history of the setting is very vague. Yeah, it's really kind of these things happened in the past, but really you're in the now, and nobody's really aware. People live in this kind of ahistorical timelessness, because you can never leave. What is history when you're essentially trapped in a static situation? And people have asked kind of what if I do this with a group in play and everything? How would this affect? There is no canon. That's the thing. You want to fiddle about with stuff and everything, I kind of, the idea of like, in an imaginative endeavour, like role-playing games, creating some kind of historical canon that you must adhere to seems at odds with the imaginative nature of play. I don't know if many people would agree with that, or maybe just be a facile statement. Brackets, I think it is a facile statement.
Well, I don't think it's a facile statement, but I think there are a lot of people that are really into lore, and they like. I mean, to me, lore, L-O-R-E, is a newer word. When I was playing games as a teenager, that just wasn't.
Yeah.
And then towards the 2000s, sort of the idea of like fluff and so on.
Yes,
which wouldn't really be used now, I don't think, because lore has replaced that, because it has a lot more weight to it, doesn't it? Lore. Literally, the word fluff was always like, that's just, foam on the top.
Yeah.
Blow it off and play the proper game, which is the maths, was sort of the influence of like crunch and fluff. The real game is this math stuff. And I think coming from more of I've probably spent as much time live action role playing in my youth as I did tabletop role playing. So the mechanics are so light in live action role play to almost be barely there, because you can't, they don't. It's very difficult to have mechanics in that situation. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Because obviously there are kind of like there are certain games, because of their longevity, have a huge weight of internal history. RuneQuest Glorantha has it's fearsome.
I've got a copy of the guide to Glorantha, volumes 1 and 2 somewhere. It's too heavy to get.
I wouldn't even know. It'd be starting a real history project, trying to explore that world and the sheer depth and breadth and volume of everything. That would terrify me, to be quite honest.
But I think it appeals to a lot of people I know who are really, really into Glorantha, because I did a lot of covers for Glorantha whilst knowing relatively little about it. I mean, we played RuneQuest, but it wasn't like RuneQuest now. It was just another fantasy role-playing game.
So likewise,
the GW version didn't really...
Exactly.
I don't even know if it had Glorantha in the way we played in those days.
It didn't even really have a set. I remember having the hardback that GW did. It didn't even really have a setting. It was just a fantasy kind of game.
I've never really spent much time on or in Glorantha, sort of, in any dedicated way. But I know a bunch of people who are really into it, obviously, including a bunch of the creators, Jeff Richard and so on. I haven't spoken to Jeff in ages, I must drop in a line. But I think for those people, knowing that stuff is part of it.
Yes,
and it's
absolutely.
That's part of the satisfaction is learning it all and knowing it. I don't think that's for me, really. But then I know a lot of Tolkien stuff. But yeah, maybe I encountered that at a young enough age that it felt... See, there we go. I can segue back into...
Yeah.
I remember the now much maligned Tolkien bestiary was a thing in our house, and my sister who was 10 years older than me, so everything my sister did was sort of quite mysterious and attractive to sort of like little me, to like, what's she doing, or quite magical. And she had Lord of the Rings and had maps, same story as everyone else.
Yeah.
Those maps and runes. It was like, what is that? That's amazing. My dad had a copy of David Day's Tolkien bestiary, which I used to just pore over, not really knowing what it was. I didn't really understand if it was even like a history book, was it?
Maps are that. They're such fascinating things. Maps of any kind are fascinating things to look at, from the most simple to the most complicated. I can totally understand that fascination. For me, it was the Titan, the fighting fantasy world.
Yeah.
The kind of the big A4 book that had the maps of Alancia and the other 2 continents in the fighting fantasy world that I can't remember. And I would sit and just look at these maps and locations and everything. So I loved that. I absolutely loved that stuff.
There's so much nostalgia in gaming? This is very pertinent.
Yeah, the power of memory.
This probably won't edit this in time to be timely, but Wizards of the Coast have just released the new covers for 5.5 or whatever it is. And there's been I've been quite dismayed by a lot of the reaction online. I think it's quite unkind to Tyler, who painted it, who is a massive D&D fan. That's what grips my proverbial about it. The guy is really into D&D, is a lovely guy, and has obviously, he's put his heart and soul into this thing. and people are like, oh, it just looks meh to me, and you go, oh man, like really. But as you scratch the surface of that, for me, and people will probably be upset in the comments, that's about nostalgia. That it's like, why doesn't it look like the ones I remember? And it's quite interesting when you read some of the criticisms about it. I was doing a bit about, there were several, not several, there were hundreds of sort of mean tweets that are convinced that painting is AI, which it just isn't. And the criteria used to define it as AI all apply to things like a paladin in hell and, you know, the chaotic and all that. First edition artwork that is quite naive looking, all has the same problems of perspective and depth of field and anatomy. It's all over the shop. And now I don't want to get into the AI thing either, but it's really interesting how that all works, and how memory works in that, and nostalgia and a fondness for the past. And when we played games when we were young, you know, or like we're talking about poring over maps when you were young, was a very different experience, because I think when you're a kid, you have to join the dots in the adult world, and you're brilliant at it as a kid. And as you get older, you lose some of that. Some people lose some of that, but other people remain absolute idiots their whole life in order to preserve that. I mean, I don't do it like in quite a self-conscious way, but I'm very keen to maintain a childlike wonder at
But
things.
you've got to have a sense of wonder. I think you can have kind of nostalgia that captures that sense of wonder about things. And then you can have I think it's a very toxic, corrosive version of nostalgia that is just...
It's not remembering.
It's reactionary.
Yeah. Yes, in the real sense of the word reactionary, right? And it's not looking at a piece of artwork and going, how would I have seen that when I was 9? It's going, I'm 59 looking at it and I'm not impressed, so it must be awful. But if you were 9, you'd probably think it was amazing.
I saw that cover for the first time today only because you'd mentioned it. And I looked at it and went, I'm not the target market, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, look, you know, and exactly
that magic user looks pretty cool. I don't know if it's a magic user or what. That magic user looks pretty cool. And there's a dragon, and you know.
I thought it was really interesting as well. I mean, I'm just talking, so not really on topic, but I was looking at suddenly everyone is like an art direction expert, and painting expert online. I mean, I know this is just the way online discourse works, and I shouldn't take it remotely seriously, but I have been in a similar position making covers for Middle-earth games, and just the abuse, the sort of offhand abuse, I do not miss it, and it does get to you and it does affect you because you've tried really hard, you know, but everyone's suddenly an expert. But all the people I know who are fantastic art directors are just like, yeah, that's absolutely nailed it, spot on, well done. And in part because, could I criticise it? Could I give you a critique of that piece of artwork? Yeah, if you pay me. Do you know what I mean? Because it's a professional skill, and I don't do it off the books almost. But I don't know. It just frustrates me that loss of that sort of cynicism. I find sad. I guess I understand. To be fair, as well, to people that are annoyed, a lot of people are annoyed with the direction the company has taken that game in. I don't necessarily agree with that because I really like 5th edition. Sorry, everyone. But I also look. I've got my Beckley, t-shirt. I like that as well because I like all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's a shame, and that's not what I think nostalgia should be.
I need to get a Twilight 2000 t-shirt to wear in these things or something like that.
Yeah, but that would be cynical. This isn't cynical.
Trust me, I am cynical.
That's my heart under there, man.
I
am cynical, very
cynical. I mean, my first article on scholarly historical article on my kind of games and nuclear apocalypse in the Cold War. Only last month submitted to the Journal of American Studies on Twilight 2000.
Nice.
I think it's the first, I'm pretty confident it's the first academic article ever written about Twilight 2000.
Nice.
I'm kind of...
And
if anyone knows of any others, please don't send them to me because it will just blow my argument out of the water.
First, last, and always.
I'll be like, no, someone else has written about this. Oh, damn it!
That's always your absolutely brilliant job.
That's always your dread. You get like, yay, I've done this thing. No, someone's God damn it, preempted.
Dear,
I wasn't vigorous enough in my bibliographic investigations.
It is really interesting looking back in a sort of academic way at things we consumed as kids. I say kids broadly, when we were young. I think it's really interesting. Yeah, and memory. We've barely got into memory. Look, we're coming up on half an hour.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
it's boiling.
But I would,
here.
I would like to kind of, on that Twilight 2000 note, played that again. I mean, literally just down the road from here.
Yeah.
On my friend Scott's house, we played a lot of Twilight 2000. Scott GM'd it, and we were. It was, military adventures. It's what I'm going to get his name wrong. Historian Graham Dawson, I think. He wrote this great book. I can't even remember his name. Graham Dawson in the 90s, and it's about what he called, and I've mentioned this before, the masculine pleasure culture of war.
Right.
And he was talking about war movies, commando comics, all that kind of stuff. I find it a brilliant phrase that encompasses so much. And I look back on what I think are my memories of that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it was. It was teenage boys playing at being soldiers.
Because
that's what it was.
Did you have the experience? I think I really liked role-playing games because I super enjoyed imaginative play as a kid, running around in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Really liked that.
Yeah.
And then you're not really sort of supposed to do it, but I still wanted to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could get away with it through like Dungeons and Dragons or Dragon Warriors in my case. You could still do imaginative nonsense.
That was, we used to, it was just we used to, down at the barn, actually circling background, we used to, as a kid, you'll have done exactly the same. You get a stick that's just strong enough and a bit of string and make yourself bows and arrows, and you tie stones to sticks and make tomahawks and everything. And you look back at it thinking, wow, cultural appropriation kind of Armageddon there. Yeah. But that's what we did then. And you didn't want to leave that behind. This goes back to the sense of wonder. I still don't want to leave that behind.
Yeah.
I like the idea of imagination and sense of wonder and all these kind of things. And role-playing games, I think, very much a continuation of that.
Yeah, continuation of it. And I think it's interesting that we've come to a place, like I'm really interested, it's just boring mentioning my own games, but like Mass Creatures of Forgotten Dogland, I find a really interesting game to play because you are exploring completely different material conditions, but while still being a human being, right? And what is that all about? What is it like? And that is kind of quite not unrelated to the way you play as children, where you're trying to figure out. Play is just figuring out the world, right? Joining those dots that you don't understand. Yeah, really interesting. Could talk a lot more about this. Do you know someone else we should get onto this program?
Yes. Although
she gives you a clue, is not a bloke with rectangular glasses, which is kind of tricky.
Awkward.
I know. Is Annie Norman of Bad Squid.
Oh yes.
Talking about sort of war and stuff, because Annie is really, really interested in, say, World War II.
Yeah.
And women's history of war. Women's history of war? Is that have I misnomered? But
no, I think that's perfect.
Women's history is a thing, and of war, and yeah.
Gender and war, big field.
Yeah, and I know Annie has got a lot to talk about all that, and is an interesting person also. So
yes.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
We could maybe allow her to be a balding, rectangular, spectacled man in an honorary capacity. No, turns out it's not actually a role.
Nobody deserves that. Nobody deserves that.
But that would be good, yes.
Yes, that would be good. But anyway, so I think that's another rambling, but it's been interesting to talk about, a much more on a much more personal level.
I liked it though. That's it. I'm sorry. I realised this the other day. I'm just totally interested in why I'm interested.
Oh, if you like it, well, that's okay then.
Yeah, exactly. It's me. I'm not making it very much.
Yeah,
it's really bad. That.
Yeah.
My entire output.
Hello to our 150 viewers on YouTube.
Yeah, but I'm not even bothered.
Yeah,
I don't work for the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah.
I got quite aggressive about this the other day. Yeah, you should use different thumbnails, and we should do a weekly one or a daily one, and you should do this and you should do that. I don't work for YouTube. I don't work to gain YouTube advertising money.
Daily. We've got jobs.
I know.
How long do they think this takes to do?
It's really bad. I am a terrible person though, because I'm not that bothered. Do you know what I mean? I'm not doing it to get clicks on YouTube. I'm doing it because I think it's interesting, and if someone finds this and they think it's interesting, that's lucky.
Yeah.
No, cool, good.
Yeah.
If you're watching this and you find it interesting,
good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I like that you're watching it, but I'm not going to do all this work for YouTube that you must do this and you must do that.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever I want.
Next time, back to the heavyweight brain sweat.
Yeah.
Of considering ancient history, probably. Who knows?
Could be anything.
Yeah.
Right, bye.
Bye.
See ya.